No-till farming. You've probably heard it talked about as this miracle cure for agriculture, right? A key part of regenerative farming, a climate-friendly way to save our soils. And look, in a lot of ways, it is. But there's a whole other side to this story, one that's a lot more complicated. So let's dig in and figure out where the healthy soil ends and the toxic trade-offs begin. When you picture a farm, what do you see? Probably a tractor pulling a plow, turning over that dark, rich earth. It's an image that's been with us for thousands of years. But what if that very tool, the symbol of farming itself, was actually the problem? This constant digging and churning, called tillage, has a dark side that we saw in the most terrifying way during the American Dust Bowl. So, here's what happens. Plowing basically pulverizes the soil's natural structure. It just tears it apart. This leaves the soil naked and totally exposed so wind and rain can just carry it away. It also compacts the ground, crushes the homes of all those essential earthworms and microorganisms, releases carbon that was stored safely in the soil right up into the atmosphere, and it makes it way harder for the land to even hold on to water. It's a really destructive cycle. Okay, so in response to all this destruction, a pretty radical new idea started to grow. What if we just stopped plowing altogether? And that brings us to no-till farming, which has been presented as this really elegant, modern solution to all the problems tillage creates. The idea is actually super simple, but it's totally revolutionary. Instead of plowing up a field, farmers use these special drills to plant seeds directly into the ground, leaving all the stalks and leaves from the last harvest right there on the surface. The soil itself, it's pretty much left completely alone. And on paper, the benefits are amazing. That layer of old crop stuff acts like a protective blanket, stopping erosion in its tracks. And since you're not constantly disturbing it, that whole underground world of microbes and earthworms can finally thrive, which is great for soil structure. This soil armor also traps moisture, which saves a ton of water. And hey, farmers love it because they're not driving their heavy tractors back and forth as much, which saves them a boatload on fuel and labor. I mean, it sounds perfect, right? A total win-win. Well, this is where our story takes a really sharp turn, because the promise of no-till farming, it often comes with a pretty big catch, a hidden chemical connection that really makes you question if it's as regenerative as it sounds. And this, right here, is the multi-billion-dollar question. For centuries, the #1 tool for getting rid of weeds was the plow, and just physically rip them out of the ground. So if you take the plow out of the equation, what do you do instead? For the vast majority of conventional no-till farmers, the answer is chemicals. They've basically swapped one kind of disruption for another. Instead of mechanical disruption with a plow, they use chemical disruption with a sprayer. The weeds die either way, but the method and the consequences are completely different. And the scale we're talking about here is just mind-blowing. Get this, a full 93% of all corn and soy grown in the U.S. using no-till or low-till methods relies on toxic pesticides. So this isn't some small fringe issue. This is at the very heart of how conventional no-till is done today. And you'd think it would be a simple one-for-one trade, right? Plow for sprayer? But actually, no. Research shows that switching to no-till can actually increase the amount of herbicides you have to use. Why? Well, that protective blanket of crop residue we talked about, it can soak up some of the spray, which means farmers might have to apply even more just to make sure enough of it gets to the weeds. The chemical dependency doesn't just stop with weed killers either. To protect the crops from pests without digging them up, the system often leans on insecticides that have a devastating impact on the entire ecosystem, especially on the pollinators we all depend on. Okay, I really want you to let this sink in for a second. Up to 100% of conventional no-till corn seeds come pre-coated with a class of insecticides called neonicotinoids. These are systemic, which means the poison is absorbed by the plant. It basically poisons the plant from the inside out, making its pollen and nectar toxic. These chemicals are a major reason for the collapse of bee populations all over the world. The climate impact is also massive. Just manufacturing all the agrochemicals, the herbicides, the insecticides, the synthetic fertilizers used on no-till corn and soy in the U.S. has a carbon footprint equivalent to putting up to 11.4 million extra cars on the road every single year. Now this is fascinating. We hear all the time about cover crops being a huge climate solution, right? But this data shows that just getting rid of the synthetic chemicals in no-till corn could be just as effective at cutting CO2 emissions, acre for acre. It's a huge potential climate win that almost nobody talks about in policy circles. Okay, so I get it. The chemical trade-offs are pretty serious. But the whole original point of no-till was about building healthy soil and storing carbon. That basic benefit has to still be true, doesn't it? Well, you would think so, but even here, the science is surprisingly not so clear. Several huge studies have found that while no-till does pack more carbon into the top few inches of soil, it can actually cause a loss of carbon in the deeper layers. And the net result? Often, it's a total wash. No overall gain in stored carbon. The main climate benefit that's been promoted for years is now being seriously questioned. So all of this really forces us to take a step back and rethink what regenerative actually means. The real debate isn't about whether no-till is good or bad, it's about the entire system that no-till is being used in. And this slide just lays out the two different worlds perfectly. On the left, you have conventional no-till, hooked on herbicides, synthetic fertilizers, and usually just growing one crop over and over. But on the right, you have a truly holistic system, one that uses crop diversity and natural cycles to build healthy soil. No-till can be an amazing tool, but only when it's part of that ecosystem-focused system on the right. And this quote from a Friends of the Earth report just hits the nail on the head. You can't just take one practice, like no-till, douse it in chemicals, and call it regenerative. True regeneration means looking at the whole farm as a living system. Which brings us to our final and most critical question. If a farming method, even one that helps reduce erosion, relies on a system that's poisoning pollinators, polluting our water, and might not even be storing more carbon, then what does the word regenerative really mean? That's the question we all need to be asking as we think about the future of